How are you?
Good, and you?
Good.
All right, so I think everyone's back in here. First, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. I hope the breakout rooms worked better this time. Thank you to everyone that gave feedback on actually how to accomplish what I was trying to do in that first meetup. First, would like to introduce Lori. A lot of you who I see a lot of NSS people in here, so a lot of you know Lori. She's a fantastic person. And she is coming to speak with us, lead the conversation about kind of her work she did on our capstone and kind of her journey with data. One thing I would like to note, as we all know, having conversations via Zoom, it's a little tricky if multiple people try and speak at once. So to kind of help facilitate that conversation, I'm going to be moderating the comments. So if you have any questions or things you'd like to talk about, feel free to post that to the chat. And then as we have opportunities, I will be kind of asking those questions on your behalf. But without further ado, I'm going to let Lori take it over.
Great. Thank you, Alex. I will share screen and get the right one and hit presentation mode. There we go. I can still see some of you, so head nods if you can see the screen okay. Great. Okay, good. And you must be able to hear me since you answered that. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity to speak this. It was fun to sort of dust off the capstone after spending so much time on it, then setting it aside for months. So last June, for people who don't know me, I graduated from the data analytics boot camp at Nashville Software School. To qualify for graduation, each student creates their own final project, and it's called a capstone project. They choose their own topic, they select which data to use, they decide what programming languages to use, and then also record a final presentation. So I'm going to start by going through the pretty part, the final capstone presentation first. And this will take about 10 minutes. After that, I'll spend the remaining time sharing information about a few of the rather messy steps that happened along the way. A little about the messy steps was covered in the presentation, but I'll talk about some additional things that I didn't share in the presentation when I go into this second part. So before I launch into my presentation, I wanted to mention that everything I'm about to show you interactively is available on a website called Tableau Public, just public.tableau. And I'll see about getting these slides to Alex so that you can have this link that's down here. So you click there and you can actually get an interactive version of what I'm about to show you. Let me switch gears here. Go into Tableau. What I'm going to be showing you from here is just on my desktop, but it'll look substantially the same. So what I'm about to share is the exact presentation that I made to people who came to hear the capstone presentations at NSS as part of the graduation. The title of my capstone is What's Happening in My Neighborhood, an exploration into Nashville's growth. Gotta go there. My motivation for doing this is twofold. First, growth is happening right next to me here in Nashville. I live in the Bordeaux area, a bit north of Nashville. The lot next door is 2.3 acres. It's vacant and it sold in 2014 for $60,000. And 5 years later, it sold for more than triple that amount, $219,000 in 2019. That's a big jump. I also live near a segment of Clarksville Pike that's being widened into 4 lanes going all the way out to Briley Parkway. So even more growth is expected to head our direction. We found out later on the lot next door, after the people bought it, they had to tear down a house that was already there. And they tried to get permitting for a 24-unit apartment complex on our lovely little residential street. Thankfully, they did not get that approved. To look at this upcoming growth, I used building permit applications and building permits issued data sources from the Nashville Open Data Portal. For anybody who loves data, that's a great place to go digging around to see what's there. I also used the Nashville-Davidson County zip codes GeoJSON file. I chose to look at the building permit information because it gives a major hint, as this Investopedia article states, into the state of the economy in the recent past and also a glimpse into the near future. I initially considered using the neighborhood association boundaries, but I quickly realized that wasn't going to give me enough coverage, so I went with the zip code coverage. Before I talk about this in depth, I wanted to go over the permitting process to help understand how I looked at the data. After submitting an application for a permit, it doesn't just automatically go to having a permit issued. There are lots of steps involved. It has to go to the codes, fire marshal, public works, water service, and sometimes has to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission as well. So there's sometimes weeks or even months in between a permit being applied for and a permit being issued. I've lost I haven't done this in a while, so I've lost my place there. Okay, so data challenges. Some of the challenges I had with this data were in three main areas. First, there were issues getting the latitude and the longitude, so I had to use something called regular expressions. There were also some of the mapped locations were showing up in other states, clearly far outside of Davidson County, so I had to get rid of those. And I also had to eliminate those that had a 0 house number, which is what happens when there's a new subdivision. Another challenge I had came with the permit applications data. The applications, this excludes applications that are rejected or withdrawn, and it's supposed to only have the past 3 years of data of permit applications, but the database had actually data going all the way back to 2004. That's far more than 3 years. There were also a problem in the permits issued with duplicates. This is an example of the actual data. We have the same address, 2 different dates of a permit issuing, and these, it doesn't show on this screenshot, but these were 2 completely different permit numbers issued because in 2019, a different contractor was assigned. So there are some duplicates, and it was pretty much impossible in my time frame to eliminate those. So there's a handful of duplicates in the data. The key questions I explored were first, where's the growth happening based on the number of permits issued? I also was interested to see the average construction cost in those areas. Then second, I was interested to see where might the growth happen next. And I could see that by looking at the permit applications data. I'll give you a second to have your eyes adjust to this. So we have, this is where growth has been happening in the past. These are number of permits issued. Right now we're looking at all of the data from June 1st and the first few days of June 1st, 2017 through June 4th, 2020. So this is the summary. And number of new residential permits, Sylvan Park and North Nashville are in the top 2 in all but a very few months in this whole past 3 years. It's not East Nashville. East Nashville's down here. So this shows all, and then I can start from here and walk backwards. This is May 2020. Again, North Nashville had 20 new home permits, and Sylvan Park had 14. And the map over here, this shows an amount, the darker shading, the more there are, and the individual circles are individual addresses. So if you open this up on Tableau Public, you can go to a particular month, or you can stick with all and just hover around and see particular addresses. You can also click, maybe you want to see what happened in your area. You can click East Nashville. Of course, that's too many dots for, I'll go back to just showing 1 month. East Nashville, you can zoom in, so it's kind of fun. So this was the number of permits issued. Getting to the next place in my notes here. The next thing I looked at were where has the growth been happening as far as average construction cost. And what I did is I left this chart showing the number of permits issued. So Sylvan Park is still at the top with all of them, but you can tell by the darker gray shading that even though they're at the top of the popularity and where things are being built, they're definitely not the most expensive. So it's interesting, even though they've had 3 years, Sylvan Park and North Nashville and Sylvan Park have had 3 years at the top of the volume, they are never the darkest green. And you'll see them pop around in different places in the chart over here. So I'm just walking back. This is now February of 2020. This is again, Sylvan Park and North Nashville. January 2020, Sylvan Park and North Nashville, top 2. That really surprised me when I got into this data. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to see was what would potentially things look like in the future based on number of permit applications. These are plans for future building. And at that point in time, I did a static map on this one because at that point in time, we don't know, just because a permit is applied for, it could be issued in 1 month or 2 months or four months. We don't know that. So it's better in this case to look at this in the total number of permit applications from December of 2019 to May of 2020. And we see, once again, Sylvan Park and North Nashville are very high on this. There we go. So the conclusions from this are where the growth has been happening, the top 2 neighborhoods, and they're not the top in construction cost. And we know where the growth might be happening is still in the same place. The only caveat is that it doesn't guarantee when something's going to be issued. And last slide in this part of the presentation is just an acknowledgement to Nashville Software School, Mary and Mahesh. They were awesome, very, very patient instructors. There are links to everything in the back of this, which again is on Tableau Public, and also to the GitHub repository, which is just a place to go see more details. I did this work in Python, Jupyter Notebook, and Tableau Desktop, and some work in Excel as well. So before I pop back over to my PowerPoint presentation, do we have any questions about this?
Nope, nothing coming up in the chat. So let's just pop over.
Okay, I will pop over again. Let's see, back to PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay, so that was the pretty part. Now I'll talk about how it got to that point. Okay. Messy part number 1, data selection and data questions. It is time consuming to search for data. So much data, so little time. If anybody's interested in learning the types of information that's out there, I would encourage you to sign up for a weekly email newsletter called Data is Plural. You can just Google that and find a link to it. A new one came out yesterday, I believe, or today. And some of the data that's described in here, one is polling places, another one is the Xinjiang internment camps data, another one is data that's now available on historical newspaper imagery, another one on even older UK economic figures, and another one on a lifetime of first kisses. So, I mean, you name it, things I had never even dreamt of as possible. So it is really daunting to go out into the world with no guardrails and say, find something to make data on. So that was the first challenge. Second, I did settle on 4 data sets from Metro. Personally, I have a connection to building and zoning because my father was fourth generation of a family who owned lumber companies, and he was a home designer, so I've been around home building. But I decided to do that, and then I decided to do 4 data sets. And my original plan, so you can see just how far off I was to create a dashboard where a user would put in an address or a zip code and pull up several pieces of information like the council district. And I would have this in my pie of the sky thinking, I would have this live connected to the databases that are updated nightly from Metro. And I thought that would be a really awesome tool so that people wanting to go to their next council meeting would have an idea, well, how many property standards violations are there? Which that is public information, by the way, by address. You can look to see if the neighbor down the street has had any complaints filed about them leaving their trash out or whatever. It's pretty fascinating. But that turned out to be biting off more than I could chew. So that did not happen, and you see where I landed. If you think you're narrow enough, go narrower. That's the motto.
Hey, Lori, I got a couple questions for you.
Yes.
All right. So from Bettina, do you attribute the number of building permits in Sylvan Park to the rise of slim and tall single homes in that area?
I would say it's probably a mix. I didn't go that you can't tell construction type by the permit without digging a lot deeper on thousands of records. So I didn't look up that, but driving around that makes sense. But it was still surprising to me that East Nashville didn't have more, because there's a lot of tear downs happening in East Nashville. But it looks
I can say in East Nashville that there's a ton, as someone who used to live there, there's a ton of tall and skinnies. As you go to certain neighborhoods, they're kind of popping up everywhere.
Those do count even when they're built sort of like a duplex. I did happen across a couple, and I noticed that even when it looks like a duplex, when they've got separate addresses, they're counted as single family homes, which I think is interesting, even though there's a shared construction, a shared supporting wall. I don't quite fathom how that happens.
One quick comment on East Nashville, that seems to be mostly apartment buildings, the growth over there.
Oh, is
it's
that
like houses is huge buildings with tons of condos and apartments. So that would not show up in your analysis for that reason.
Yeah, I just thought there would be more single family home over there. It was also surprising that at no time more than a month or two, it was like the number 3 spot, or the third in the top 3, I should say, not always number 3 spot, was always some other different neighborhood. It was surprising to me that maybe Bellevue, but I guess those places are a lot more developed. So any other questions, Alex?
Yes. From Lydia, do you use geospatial in Python to generate your map? Also, how do you narrow down to where to get data?
The second question first is, you at some point you run out of time and you just have to pick something. The first part of that question is yes, I did use geospatial, and there's a way to get the dots overlapping the shaded maps. There's a way of doing 2 maps folded into one. I can't remember the exact name of it. Mary could tell us. But there's a way of doing the, I don't have it up here. The maps where you get both the shading of the area as well as the dots, and it's creating 2 maps, and then you fold them over on top of each other. And that took about 5 or 6 hours of, and now I could do it in an hour, but yes, all of this takes time.
Spatial joins, Mary says.
Spatial joins, yes. Yes, for the really technical stuff, ask Mary, because I haven't touched this for 3.5 months. Any
All
other
right.
questions?
No, that's
Yeah,
it.
Just a quick comment, Lori. You're talking about units that shared a wall being
Mhm.
counted as single residential. I don't know if you know this, but there was a regulation. There's R40 zoning, which allows one residential unit on an acre, and R20, which allows two. And what you see a lot going on in East Nashville particularly is lots that had one residence but were zoned R20 on an acre are being split because the zoning allows it. But for a while, to get around, if you're an R41 but two units, the permitting permission allowed, as long as the buildings shared a common wall, you could construct two units on a property zone for R40. And that was rescinded about 6 or 7 years ago. But for a while, that's how they got around putting multiple units on a property zone for one.
Always a way around it, apparently.
And got one other question real quick,
Yes.
or maybe not quick, but I'm new to Tableau and the data update, find the data update challenging. I'm not looking for a tutorial now, but is the data update easier than it seems? So, oh, I apologize. So Linda, that was private. But I would say, I mean, Lori, what are your thoughts on ingesting data into Tableau and like updating data through Tableau?
Tableau or Power BI, they both have very distinct intricacies that make them difficult to learn. The specific reason I chose Power to do my capstone in Tableau is because I tanked when we did it earlier in the class, and Power BI made more sense to me intuitively. I felt like that after class, if I ever had to work in Power BI, I can figure it out. Tableau made zero sense to me, so I thought, okay, this is the best time for me to struggle through and learn Tableau, is when I will have the support of classmates and instructors. So I agree, it's difficult, and the only way out is through. Just keep poking away at it, keep asking questions, go on the community pages, get really good at Googling things, because there are so many variables. That's just keep looking for the variables and you'll get it.
Absolutely not. It is not just you. It is,
No,
it's tricky. And even as a data professional for a long time, like whenever you're getting into any new platform like that, there's just all these oddities. I will say that there's a group called Penny University. If you're ever looking for folks that are, we're all lifelong learners. I'll do a plug at the end, but we're a great community. So if you're ever looking for someone to talk about any specific topic, we're a great community for that. All right.
Great. Okay. Messy data messy part number 2 is dealing with messy data. So I went over some of that in the presentation, but a few other things that I invested time in that had to be handled is initially the list that I had only had zip codes. It did not have any neighborhood names. So I manually created, not that long of a list, but I manually created a list, imported that, matched it up where anytime this zip code appears, this name will appear, so that would be nice for the readers. The category column, in order to get building residential new versus building commercial new, I had to know residential versus commercial. So I did a process to look at those words. If that column contains the word residential, call this column just residential. So I had to do that. And missing latitudes and longitudes. I probably spent a full day on various aspects, at least, of this. There were lots of addresses that did not have longitudes and latitudes. Some of them had that 0 house number because it's a new subdivision, so I knew about those, but many others didn't. There are lots of, at least 2 that I found, free tools online to be able to plug in a spreadsheet full of addresses, and it will theoretically return back to you longitude and latitudes so that you can map them. I did that on 2 different systems and only got back about 5% of the addresses with longitudes and latitudes, even with the full address. So those were some other ways that you just run into messy data that you have to fuss with. Any questions on that one before I go on?
Yes, I have a question of what format are the permit files in?
They're in Excel format. You could actually I downloaded them as a CSV file, I believe. When you go to the Metro data.nashville.gov, you can choose many different types of file downloads. It's very robust. You can get police data. I mean, go out there and check it out sometime, just if you want something to while away that, 5 or 10 minutes, go out and take a look at all of the data that's out there. It's crazy. Okay, so the last messy part I wanted to talk about is creating the story. What's hard about this is by the time you're writing the story, you have been immersed in the nitty-gritty details for a couple of weeks at least. And it's very challenging to pull back out of the process and say, okay, so what do I need to describe here? And at some point it was pointed out to me, it's like, well, people don't know about the permitting process. Thankfully, I found this image, which happened to be in my color scheme. I didn't make that happen, that's just accidental. So I added this slide to describe things. So it's important. It's not exactly a messy part, but it is something to plan on, is to spend a long time writing and rewriting and editing and making it shorter, because it's easy to do a 1-hour presentation. It's very hard to do a 10-minute one. And explaining the basics. So my last slide is sort of popping out of what's messy, and I actually stole this from Alex's blog. It's an for people who aren't in data analysis, this is an interesting way of looking at the relationship, because you'll hear terms like data engineer, data analyst, data scientist, machine learning, and they go on a progression of dealing with the actual data in databases to all the way to the other end of let's do predictive modeling with really heavy statistics. And so data analysis falls in here. Even within data analysis, there's a spectrum. There's the data wrangling, getting the data, cleaning the data, and working with the systems, which in the new job I have at HealthStream, what I'm actually doing isn't even on this chart. My primary goal is clean the data, or working with the system where the data comes from. I'm now calling myself informally a clean data advocate, trying to get it clean up here so it's less miserable to work with when it comes to the data analysis. And what I learned through the software school is I much prefer this side of things, the cleaning, the logistics, the working with the data, the open-ended exploration and the data visualization is fun, but I end up spending more time here because that's more fun for me. So it's all of these skills are needed. So I point this out that no matter where your strengths are, other people will have strengths in other areas, and you're going to be like, man, I'm no good because I'm no good at this part, or I'm no good at that part. It's like, that's fine. You're going to be no good at a lot of stuff. You only need to find your sweet spot, and you'd be fine. And that's true with any, I think, IT realm. You can't know it all. You just have to keep going. So I've got the link down there too, to Alex's blog. So that is my presentation. Any other questions?
She's wrapped up, so feel free if you just want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, go ahead. And
we can kind of have an open dialogue. And yes, thank you, Lori. This was.
I'll stop sharing so we can all see each other again.
I just had a question about keeping this like updated in real time. Are you planning to do that? And no, okay.
No, yeah, that would, two problems with it. One is just learning that aspect of it would take me far longer than I had time or interest in. And the second aspect is so much of the data has to be cleaned. It's not just bring the data in. There's a zero, like all of those problems I talked about with the data. It's not just making the live connection, it's also finding a way to automate all of that. I still wish somebody would design and build that dashboard that is like everybody that I told that initial idea to people that I did mock interviews with, and every one of them said, that's a great tool. I'm like, I wish somebody would do that for my neighborhood. And now I'm like, yeah, I wish somebody would do it for mine too. Any other questions?
I have a question. So you, so I know you said you have different files, CSV files, and do you happen to use API or web scraping to get the data set?
Now you can just download those straight from the data.nashville.gov website. So you just go pick the file. It gives you a metadata sheet. In fact, let me share screen one more time. And because it's pretty intriguing to see what, oh, come on. There we go. Let's see, new tab. Let me get up here. There we go. If you go here, here's featured content, election results by precinct, art in public places. This is the first data set I ever worked with in the not the boot camp, the Jumpstart program. So you can come out to any of these data sets. So this gives you a list of all data, and you can export it. In this case, you can get CSV or CSV for Excel, RDF, RSS, XML, so you can get all of these different format types. If you scroll down, it tells you information about the data. You can get this attachment. This is the what's called a metadata sheet. I'll just save that and open it. So with the metadata sheet, gives a description of what's inside the data set. So Nashville does this. Most large cities do this. So you can go out to any large city and all of this is just public information. You can go out and get it and download it. And towards the bottom, you've even got a sample of what it looks like. You've got title, the artist's last name, artist's first name, location of the sculpture. So it's quite a fun website to plow around in. And that's just one resource. One of the other things, so Mary gave us a list when we were in class of different places to go to get data. These are all of them. Like so each of these websites gives you access to hundreds of data sets.
Can we have that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Lori, if you, that's a great list. If you wanna like export that and send it to me, I'd love to share that with the group.
Thank you so much.
Sure, I've never exported one before, but I will work on that. Yes, that came, so Mary gets credit for that because every one of those, and seriously, sign up for the Data is Plural newsletter. I still get that, just, it's like, really? Somebody keeps data on that? Very interesting.
Hey, Alex, I'll Slack you a document with links.
Oh, that'd be perfect. Of course, we have the
source.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I am about to start to look for some data and I'm all over the place.
Yeah, well, this isn't going to help. It just gives you more places to be all over the place.
Yeah.
And something that I finally realized too, there there were two other data sources that I was really interested in. The first one, I don't know if Mary will remember this, but it was a census report that I saw. It's like, ooh, I want to go in and do something similar to this, but it would have meant doing most of the analysis on text-based information, which was beyond what I could do, instead of having it be counts and numbers. The next one I thought was really interesting was a data set about medical implant devices that was just published in the last year. This is globally. And medical implant devices being things like hip replacements, knee replacements, that they were discovering globally, they were having a lot more problems when implanted in women than in men. So I thought, oh, I'll take a look at that. And I spent probably a week, thinking, oh, I'll do that, and finally got time to do a deep dive into the data. And it was like so much medical terminology. So I finally decided to do something. It's like, okay, I understand building data. The thing I want to learn here is how to make a capstone project. I don't also want to have to learn the details of the industry. So that was something that helped me and may help you, Lydia, or I think, yes, some other, Adam is in a different program, but he's also looking at doing a capstone. So pick something you're somewhat familiar with, unless you're one of these journalist type mindsets that can take in tons of information, learn this area. Like I've seen that too. So if that's you, go that direction, but that's not me. I like having a lane to be in, and I much preferred the exercises in class when we got to answer questions as opposed to go find out something interesting.
Laura, you make such a good point though. Find what energizes you. Find the things that you want to do, because there's so much, and if you try to do everything, it just very quickly it's overwhelming. And when I originally created that Venn diagram, I really wanted to show that, it's a spectrum, and you should, if you have an opportunity, I always encourage everyone to explore the spectrum of different things you can do. I started off in data engineering, received a master's in data science, and I've landed in machine learning engineering, partially because it's a blend of to me, it's a blend of both. I get to use my engineering background with my love of data science. So, but it's a journey.
I just have a question around sort of, this may be a longer discussion for another day, but around intellectual property. And like when you build a tool like this, which is potentially useful commercially, like if somebody forks your GitHub project, is there any expectation for them to give credit to you? Like maybe not monetary credit, but I guess I'm just coming from academia, at least we cite, this GitHub repo in a paper, and we can like give credit that way. But just wondering how that kind of works in the commercial world.
My understanding is, first, if you make your GitHub public, you have published it and it's fair game. Second, I believe that it is professional protocol that, and Mary, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but anytime you build on someone else's work, you're supposed to give that a link back to their GitHub and say, here's where I got that, here's my sources.
So I'll just piggyback on that, Ben, and say that when you create a GitHub repo, you can select the license that you want to associate with the repository. And I would say if there is no license assigned and no sort of, get permission before you share this statement, like Lori said, professional courtesy is to cite your reference, but it's probably fair game.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, on associated subject, one of the sources I used in my capstone was a university provided by University Professor, University of Florida. And he very much says, cite me if you use my information. Here's, on its website, says, here's how I want to be cited. Preferably do a link to my site, etc. But he's very specific about how you can use his stuff. And if you use it for commercial purposes, he might come after you.
To kind of follow up on that question, so let's say I go to GitHub, oh, I want to learn, let's say I go to Lori's GitHub, I want to learn how her notebooks look like. So do you git clone it just to take a look of it, or you fork it so she knows someone take her information?
So typically what I like to do when I'm working with someone else's stuff, especially if I'm going to go in there and I'm going to be changing stuff up and I want to track my changes as well, I'll fork the repo. I mean, you can clone it, but at that point, you're not going to be as able to easily change stuff. If you fork it, you're taking that copy, putting it into your repo, and it allows you to kind of make it your own. Or not make it your own, but like do your own thing with it.
Can't you also download? I don't know. I don't remember this. I haven't been in there in a while. Can you download the actual notebooks and open them in your own instance of Jupyter Notebook? And,
So when they clone cloning is the same thing as
okay,
downloading.
so cloning it, yeah.
Yeah. But she would be working, when you clone a repo, you're working directly on that repo. It's set up, and if you really think of like the term is like you're set up as a remote source to your like local repo. Where if you fork it, you're taking that repo, putting it under your account, and then working with that locally. There's still that relationship. So that does let people know that regardless of what you do to it, yours originated as Lori's repo.
Yeah, me personally, if anybody went and looked and used any of my work, I would be thrilled because it's like, that's a lot of work that went into that stuff. And it would be lovely to have somebody else also get some use out of it, because nothing I did is proprietary or, yeah, it's, so help yourself. And just exploring around GitHub is an interesting thing to do. There's a lot of people have public GitHub accounts. There's no shortage of ideas. The shortage is always of time.
Any more final questions? We're coming up on time. All right, well, thank you. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, it's nice to see you, Lori. Great presentation.
Yay, thanks, Christina.
Well, thank you. First, thank you to Lori for being such a great speaker and talking through her journey. Thank you to everyone who has come to this meeting. Having these conversations is such an important part. Hey, Landry, I love those little icons. It's such an important part of the community. And if you love having these kind of conversations, I encourage you to keep coming out to Data Nerds, but I also encourage you to check out Penny University. It is our parent group. We mostly are hosted out of Slack, but it's just a group where if you're interested in a topic and you want to talk with someone about that topic, we find ways to connect you. So that being said, thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good night.
Bye.